What's good, homies? I hope you guys are having a great day. Except if you're racist. If you're racist, I hope you're having a terrible day. Welcome back to the Tiny Film Room, where today we're going to talk about one of the main cornerstones of photography that'll get you from shooting in automatic, shooting in manual. Today, we're talking about the exposure triangle. So when we're talking about the exposure triangle, we're not talking about your current love affair. We're talking about the three key things that matter when you're shooting and exposing the perfect amount of light to your film. I've had people DM me about shooting in manual. Honestly, it's a bit of a dense topic to try to answer in DM, so this video is for you guys, and bear with me, it's a bit of a dense topic like I said, so we're gonna get through it. So the three things you need to pay attention to when shooting in manual: ISO, the aperture, and the shutter speed. Given that your camera might have a light meter in it and give you the correct exposure, it'll typically look like one side's a minus sign and one side's a plus sign. There's a little monitor that tells you where your exposure's at. You typically want to get it in the middle. So we'll break down each function, but we'll bring it together at the end. And hopefully by the end of this video, you go from to and add that much spice to your photos. So the aperture is an opening in your lens that is manipulated by a bunch of overlapping blades. When you adjust these blades, it allows different amounts of light to reach your film, which in turn can overexpose or underexpose your film. These measurements are measured in f-stops, which you can see on the lens labeled as numbers. On this lens, the f-stop ranges from f22 to f2. What do the numbers mean, Mason? What do they mean?
The numbers, Mason.
So when adjusting the aperture, it's important to know that the numbers are counterintuitive, which means the larger the number, the smaller the hole there is for light to reach your film. But the smaller the number, the larger the hole is for light to reach your film. This is important to know down the line because this function is very important when you want to give depth to your photos. But we'll get into that a little later. We'll get into the depth of that a little later. Next on the list is the shutter speed. The shutter speed itself is a shield that blocks light from reaching your film. When you press the shutter button, that's what lifts and causes that little click when you take a photo. When you do that, it lifts up the shutter for a finite amount of time and allows that much light to hit your film and give the exposure. The amount of time in which the shutter flies up and comes back down is called the shutter speed. This function is super useful when you're trying to capture motion, when you're trying to get a super long and wavy exposure, or when you're just trying to get that perfect shot to shoot your shot. Hey, Michelle Obama, if you're hearing this and watching this, let me holla. But if the time is wrong, you can end up with an underexposed photo or a blurry photo and all. On your camera, you can see these functions labeled on a dial, usually measured from 1 to 2,000 of a second to probably 5 seconds, or even B, which means bulb, meaning that the shutter will remain open for as long as the button is pressed down. This function is super useful when you're trying to shoot in a lot of different scenarios, and we'll get into some more of those scenarios later on in the video. But remember, the shutter speed is very essential when you're trying to get the exposure to shoot your shot. Hit me up, Michelle. So the ISO, or also known as the ISO, is another function on your camera that should be adjusted to the speed of film that you're shooting. The general rule for ISO is the higher the ISO, the more sensitive the film is to light. You can find the ISO speed on the film canister itself, and it's very important, and I stress it, very fucking important, that you adjust the ISO on your camera to the ISO on your film. I've made this mistake multiple times when switching up films in my camera, and I can't tell you how pissed off I was at myself because it's such a small mistake to make, but it affects your shooting so much. I'm out with over or underexposed rolls, and it's just a complete waste. You're just screwed. You just get so try your best to be aware of your ISO. So the ISO of a film is very contingent to how you're going to adjust your shutter speed and your aperture. Usually if you're shooting in daylight, anything under 800 would be pretty good to shoot, but anything over 800 is probably look a lot better at night or indoors. The ISO also affects the image noise of a photo. It can either make the photo look smooth or super grainy. For example, the film with the ISO of 100 will look a lot smoother than the film with the ISO of 3200. 200. Kind of makes a photo look like, you know, it's made out of sand. It's also very artsy. Some people like grain, some people don't. I personally feel like I like the balance in between the two. There are some film stocks out there that do really well by pushing the ISO. There's a lot we can talk about, but we're just gonna keep it condensed for now, and we'll go into it a little bit later if you guys want to. Just please be sure that you adjust the ISO on your camera. Can't stress it enough. I've made that mistake so many times. I've learned from it, fucked up some rolls of film, and it's really pissed me off because I've gone to cool places and I just fuck up a roll. Just don't be me. Be better than me. Shouldn't be hard. A quick note though, if you're shooting expired film, there's a general rule of thumb. For every 10 years that the film is expired, you'd want to bump down the ISO a full stop. We'll cover that in another video. I like expired film because it's cheap and it still looks good. Alright, so now you know the three functions that make up the exposure triangle. So how do they all work together? How can you get the right adjustments going so you can get that perfect exposure? Let's say you're out shooting on a sunny day with some Aperture 400, a household name in films. Since there's a lot of light in this beautiful day, you know that your aperture should be fairly small with a fairly quick shutter speed. This way you don't overexpose your film. But did you catch the mistake? That's right. Be sure to adjust the ISO on your camera first. So put your ISO to 400 and then make your adjustments. Alright, so now your camera's set at 400 ISO. Now you want a clear focus shot of this tree. A good aperture to use would be somewhere like within f11, f16, or anywhere around that range, with a shutter speed of about 250th of a second. That should get you a pretty good exposure. But hey, let's say you want to get a portrait of the homie that's with you, but you want to make it like a really legit portrait where it has like a blurry background and all that fun shit. Then what you would do then, and this is where the aperture comes in and making those portraits look really nice, is you would adjust your aperture all the way down to the smallest number, which is the largest setting. So let's say on this lens we have the aperture f2. That's about 4 stops down from where you were shooting that tree at. So you would follow the same pattern with your shutter speed. You would increase your shutter speed about 4 shots up. So that would be you're shooting f2 at 1,000th of a second or 2,000th of a second. But always be sure to double check with your light meter in your camera. And if your light meter's not working in your camera, we'll get to that a little later. So I treat indoor shots and gloomy days kind of the same way. In this scenario, we always check our ISO first. So it's adjusted at 400 because we're shooting portrait 400, right? And then we adjust our shutter speed and our aperture. Since there isn't a lot of light in this scenario, shoot an aperture that's a little bit larger. f4 or f5.6 would probably be the way to go. You'd probably want to go with the shutter speed of like 1/60th of a second. But then again, check with your light meter in your camera to make sure that you're in the right spot. You want to be right between that plus and the minus. Alright, nighttime shooting. Here we go. You had probably a Pacifico or 6 of them, you know, and you're like, man, get nice out today. I'm about to go into the hood and get some shots. Why the not? Feeling lively, you know? Dope. I feel that. I've done that a couple of times myself, you know, it's kind of a little bit of a drink, go into the neighborhood and start shooting some random shit. Your best friend in this scenario is gonna be the tripod, because if you're shooting something at ISO 400, you're gonna have to have a longer exposure on your film for you to get that perfect exposure in general. So you're gonna have to open up that aperture, open that shit up, and you're gonna have to slow down that shutter speed. If you're shooting below a 30th of a second, you should use a tripod just to reduce the camera shake and to make sure you don't get any blurry shots. Hey, that's a sick ass lamppost. Let's go take a photo of it. With your tripod set, you want to set your aperture at a small f-stop with a long shutter speed. Night shooting isn't really that hard, but it can be tricky. You really got to pay attention to your light meter in your camera if it's working, because sometimes you might get like a photo that's f4 and you're getting a picture of this lamppost and it says, oh shit, you got to shoot it for 15 seconds. And you're like, that's too much, but that's where the little indicator lines meet up in the middle, right? That's where you get your right exposure. Sometimes it just be like that, man. Gotta let all that light hit the film so you can get that exposure. Here's the golden thing. If your light meter in your camera is not working, but it's shooting and it's adjusting itself correctly and you can still use it, I got a bit of app to show you. Whenever I feel like I need to double check my exposures, I even use it when my light meter is working, is I have this app on my phone called Light Meter. And what you do is you basically go ahead and you point it at your subject and you put at the aperture that you want. Let's say I'm shooting at 2.8 with the ISO of 400. It's gonna tell me what my shutter speed should be. And when you have something like that to your disposal right on your phone, go ahead and use it so you can double check your exposure. Sponsor me, Light Meter, guys. Holy that was a lot to explain. I know, trust me, it's a lot to take in, but don't let it intimidate you at all. The more practice you get and the more shooting you do, the more natural this will become and the more your photos will be. Maybe I'll see you when I'm drunk and you're drunk and we'll be taking photos of each other and shit, you know, with our tripods and whatnot, you know, have a little bit of a tripod fight. But knowing the ins and outs of your camera and how to use it in manual mode or even how to use it in its full functionality just gives you so much more confidence when you're out there shooting. And well, ladies and gents and non-binary homies, thanks for checking out this video. Be sure to subscribe and like to support the homie and send this to your other homies that want to start shooting film. I'll catch y'all next time when we RKO and chokeslam some white supremacists.